Hello again.
Hello again.
So we kind of talked earlier about obviously the early beginnings, really going back both in your life and career. Tell me about that whole evolution now. I'm just going to move this reportage way like I do. Tell me about that whole period of the 80s. I think that's pretty summing it up. What were some of the highlights of how you grew that business and what it was as Games Workshop, and the books as well, the fighting fantasy books, and Warhammer, and everything.
They were exciting times. I mean, the 70s had been the beginnings where we turned our hobby into a business, albeit a very small one, very hand-to-mouth. We had to live in a van for 3 months. The bank manager wasn't inclined to lend us any money. And you can't blame him, really. We weren't exactly very business-minded. We were just enthusiastic gamers, wanted to do our own thing. So Book Workshop started, and we started selling mail order. We opened our first shop in '78, and that was kind of a turning point, because we realised it wasn't just us who enjoyed role-playing games and strategy games. There was a whole bunch of people that we didn't even know existed enjoyed it too. In the meantime, we'd also started White Dwarf magazine, we'd dumped Owl and Weasel. We realised we needed to up our game, become more professional. We started Citadel Miniatures in conjunction with Brian Ansell, and that was set up in Newark, near Nottingham, to make miniatures for role-playing games and tabletop games. We started a range of board games, and all the time, Games Workshop was growing bit by bit. And we used to run these things called Games Days. And in Games Day 1979 at Seymour Hall, we had several thousand people playing D&D and other role-playing games.
How early was this?
The first one was in '75.
I wouldn't have thought it had been that popular back then.
Yeah, it was. We weren't alone playing games, It's.
But was it the fact that we talked about Games You Loved and how I started, because I didn't know there was a world out there? Was it that discovery that there were so many people into this thing that was kind of under the surface, perhaps?
We didn't know there were that many people interested in playing the games that we were interested in, but it was very wonderful to find out that there were. But at '79, we had other stands coming along, one of those being Penguin Books, and a very enthusiastic editor called Geraldine Cook came over to Steve and I and said, "This is amazing, all these people playing D&D, would you write a book about Dungeons and Dragons?" And we said, well, rather than write a book about D&D, how about we write a book that allows you to experience a role-playing adventure? And she thought, oh, that sounds great. So we thought we've pledged to do something. We don't really know what we're talking about, but so Steve and I, we set about creating a branching narrative book, with the book replacing the Dungeon Master, multiple choice, like a solo dungeon adventure, but with a game system attached to it. So it's branching narrative with a simple game system with 3 attributes: skill, stamina and luck. This is a book in which you, the reader, were the hero. You made choices from 400 paragraphs to kill a monster or find some treasure, and then that's how really the Warlock of Firetop Mountain came about. And we ended up where I wrote the first half of the adventure up to the river, and Steve wrote from the river on to the end where they meet Zagor the Warlock, including the maze that many people are probably still trapped in there 20, 40 years later. But the Penguin Books, even despite Geraldine's enthusiasm, were very reluctant to publish it. And they should it be a penguin, should it be a puffin? Apparently some editors laughed so hard they banged their head on the table, the idea of an interactive book, saying only a linear book could ever be successful. Anyway, she pushed through, to her credit, and The Warlock came out in August 1982. To pretty low-level response, because nobody knew what an interactive book was. But we promoted it through White Dwarf magazine. But our big breakthrough came on BBC Radio 1, where we were invited to read out choices to the listeners, and they would phone in and make the choices. So it became the reader, the listener's adventure. And then
I didn't know that.
Kids went to bookshops, and they started to take off in schools and spread by word of mouth, and this network effect, and suddenly the whole country was playing.
So radio had some part to play.
It did, absolutely.
Yeah. Are they still available, do you know those? Because that would be fascinating if we could find it in the archive.
I don't know. I've never found out. But then Steve had we were asked to write 2 more, Citadel of Chaos that Steve wrote, and I wrote Forest of Doom, and then after that Death Trap Dungeon, City of Thieves, and Fighting Fence became a phenomenon. And it was because of the success of Death Trap Dungeon that ultimately led to me being in the video games industry.
And what about the covers? Because they're so synonymous with the whole book series, aren't
Yeah, we wanted to use Games Workshop artists, really graphically intense moments that were, I guess, really weren't children's covers, but we loved them for workshop stuff. And Puffin were very worried that we wanted to use these artists because they wanted to use artwork that had little toadstools and a little gnome sitting on the toadstool and butterflies, and we wanted covers that threatened to rip the faces off the readers. But to their credit, they let us use our artists, and that's why we had some amazing artists like Ian McCaig, who did Forest of Doom.
Do you own any of that original art?
I own all of the covers.
Oh my god, that's amazing. Yeah. They are just, for me, I like art from all types of history, but as a modern kind of piece, they are very iconic, aren't they?
Yeah, beautiful art. And because they had such incredible detail and really kind of captured a moment of intense drama, and the detail in the art was that's why we had 20 odd line drawings inside the books as well to
bring it to
people
life.
could visualize the dire situation they find themselves in. And so anyway, through Death Trap Dungeon, it was number 1 on the bestsellers list, and 2 people, the founders of a startup company called Domark, came to see me at Workshop and said would I write their first launch video game.
Oh really? Okay.
And that was called Eureka. And so I did the design of it. They had it programmed in Hungary for secrecy because it had a £25,000 prize attached to the winner.
Oh, crikey, remember that.
And when we sold out a Workshop in '91, I joined Domark because I'd already bought equity in the company. Rather than taking royalties, I took shares.
Okay.
And so when I sold out Workshop, I made a bigger investment and joined the board. And then Domark ultimately, a few years later, metamorphosed into Eidos. We launched on the stock exchange, and I was executive chairman. Of course, Eidos, a year later, became hugely successful on the back of acquiring Centergold, the only other public quoted company in the space. And with Centergold came Core Design, with Core Design came Lara Croft Tomb Raider.
So you've seen it from becoming a fledgling hobby to a full-blown global business.
Yeah.
How is that transition for you?
Well, I've moved from being an entrepreneur startup with Games Workshop through to an author, which had tremendous success, over 20 million Final Fantasy game books sold around the world, to then becoming executive chairman of a public quoted company in Eidos. I became an angel investor in video games, and then I became a chairman again of Sumo Group PLC, and it was acquired earlier this year by Tencent. And more latterly, I've become a pure investor as a partner in a venture capital company. So moving from kind of gamekeeper to the other side of the fence, I can still keep myself relevant in my ancient age to be able to add value and help the next generation of games companies become hopefully successful. And so from my point of view, I love this industry. Work and play is the same for me. The people in it are wonderful. It's not an ego-driven industry like many entertainment industries are. The people are very sincere, collaborative, and they're creating great content, especially in the UK. And it should be celebrated. We've over-delivered in content creation in the UK, but always been underserved by the media and also by the financial institutions. So we've really punched above our weight. Games like Grand Theft Auto, Tomb Raider, Fable, Championship Manager. It goes on and on and on, the amount of blockbuster titles that have been developed in the UK, and I've been delighted to be part of that, and long may it continue.
So you mentioned some of the games that you've been involved in, obviously Tomb Raider, Hitman, I think was another title that came up, Championship Manager. Because obviously it's a retro gaming audience that follows us here. Saying they don't play new games, but what kind of classic, say, top 3 games would you say are kind of passions of yours? I mean, there's the obvious Pac-Man, Space Invaders, but there's so many games, perhaps in the arcade or on console. You mentioned one to me earlier. It's kind of considered retro now. the Dreamcast. But any games that you sit back and think, and you play it, and
the ones I've played a lot. I mean, I've played a lot of video games in my life, obviously, from playing on a Commodore PET back in the old days. I think it was 8-bit PETs, and playing games like Elite, which is effectively the size of an average email these today in terms of memory.
Yeah.
But the games I've enjoyed playing a lot, games like Civilization, Virtua Tennis on the Dreamcast, Advance Wars, SimCity, and I used to enjoy games like Defender of the Crown and Megalomania.
Yeah.
So I had an Amiga, and I loved my Amiga. So I love my Amiga, I love my first Mega Drive. I like my...
Jim Sachs, wasn't it, did the Defender of the Crown, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. What hooks you in, Ian? Like, even today, say you play games.
Well, as you can see, I'm pretty ancient, so Twitch games is not for me. I'm dead before I even started, so I need games that have some strategy in them, preferably multiplayer, because you can do deals and renege on those deals, and and hopefully that just your strategical decisions are going to be at least influential on the outcome of the game. So I can get better at a game rather than just relying on manual dexterity.
I'll put some links in some of your things you're involved in, but you also, congratulations on being a Sir.
Thank you very much.
Soon to be knighted.
Yes, well, it was announced on the New Year's Honours list, and actually going for the actual investiture ceremony in November at Windsor Castle, so I'm really looking forward to that.
That's pretty special. Also, I know you've done a lot of work in the education
Yeah.
field as well, and Yuki as well, I believe you're involved in.
Yeah, I was on the board of Yuki for 10 years. I've now timed out, but I helped convince the government in 2011 to put coding on the curriculum.
So you also have younger followers. What advice would you give them if they want to get into the industry? Apart from start as soon as you can.
Learn your craft at other people's expense. Join a company before you start thinking about going it alone, and do what you enjoy. It's really important. Some people are mathematically inclined; they're likely to become coders. Some people, like me, think visually; they're more likely to be storytellers or artists or designers. But it's to play to your strengths and get other people to do what you can't do or you shouldn't do. If you do start your own company, try and hang on to the intellectual property that you produce, because that ultimately will give you the value that it becomes yours rather than sold too early on for other people to benefit from. So my whole life has been built on own IP, from launching Warhammer from Games Workshop, from Tomb Raider, Hitman, Deus Ex, Championship Manager, IDOS. Some of the games companies I've invested in as mobile companies, it's all built on the value of owning an IP rather than just taking licenses. But the thing is, you should enjoy what you do and never be afraid of failure. Failure is just success work in progress, and you can't always expect to start off with a hit game. Angry Birds wasn't Rovio's first game, it was their 51st game. So take your learnings, move on, get better.
Brilliant. Fantastic advice. It's been an absolute dream to meet you, I have to say. Don't want to make you all embarrassed, but obviously because we've talked over Twitter, we've never met, we've always honourably followed what you've done over the years. Shake your hands there. And
thank you very much.
Wish you well with all your gaming adventures. Because I'm sure it will continue.
Well, it's never going to stop.
Exactly.
I've already started on ideas for my next Final Fantasy game, even though I said I'd never write another one. As soon as I hand in the manuscript, it all begins again.
Absolutely, and we're looking forward to the books as well. Obviously seeing the first one out very soon, and Dice Men later this year.